She thought he was just another lonely man calling the diner late at night, asking for food he never intended to eat. But he was actually Antonio DeLuca, a 52-year-old American mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground economy without ever raising his voice. And the first time he heard her, he didn't see her face, he didn't know her name. He only heard her voice. And something inside him, quietly broke. Because after 15 years of emotional silence, that voice made him feel alive again. What neither of them knew was that love wasn't just coming. It was already beginning, in the dark, over a misdialed phone call that was never supposed to happen. Before we continue, if stories about love, second chances, and emotional healing mean something to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps these stories reach people who need them the most. Now, let's continue. Naomi Carter was 43 years old. A black woman with a presence that didn't ask for attention, but somehow always held it anyway. She worked nights at a 24-hour diner called the Blue Hour, tucked between a laundromat that never closed and a forgotten record store that barely survived on nostalgia. Her life was built on repetition. Wake up. Work. Smile. Serve. Endure. Repeat. She wore exhaustion the way other women wore jewelry, quietly, without complaint. But behind that calm exterior, was a woman who had once dreamed differently. Naomi had been married once. A love that started like music and ended like silence. Her ex-husband didn't leave suddenly. He left slowly, in pieces. First his affection disappeared. Then his presence. Then his respect. By the time he finally walked out, Naomi had already been alone for years. The divorce left her with debt, a teenage daughter to raise, and a heart that stopped expecting anything good to stay. Now her daughter was grown, building her own life far away, calling less each month. And Naomi told herself that was good. That was how life was supposed to go. People leave. You adjust. You survive. But you don't fall in love again. Not at 43. Not after everything. The Blue Hour diner never slept. It existed in the cracks of the city. A place where truck drivers stopped to forget the road, where nurses came to decompress after saving lives they couldn't talk about, where broken people sat in booths pretending they weren't broken. The neon sign outside flickered like it was tired of existing. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee, fried food, and quiet regret. Naomi knew every sound in that diner. The hum of the fridge. The squeak of the floor tiles. The distant siren that never meant anything good. And the phone that sometimes rang at 2:37 a.m., always changing everything for a few minutes. Because that phone line would eventually connect her to a man she had never met. And yet somehow already understood. Antonio DeLuca lived in a different world entirely. At 52, he had already outlived most of the men who once tried to control him. To the public, he was a logistics CEO. A disciplined businessman. A man with private security, tailored suits, and meetings that ended with handshakes instead of headlines. But in the real world beneath that surface, Antonio was something else. A man born into a legacy of organized power. A mafia boss who had learned early that trust was a currency more expensive than blood. He had buried friends. He had erased enemies. And he had survived betrayal that would have destroyed most men twice over. But the deepest wound wasn't from violence. It was from love. 15 years ago, his wife left him. Not for another man, but for peace. She took their son with her. And Antonio didn't stop her. Because he knew something she didn't. His world always destroyed the people he loved. Since then, he didn't date. He didn't open up. He didn't soften. He worked. He controlled. He endured. And he told himself that was enough. But loneliness has a way of growing louder in silence. Especially in a life built on fear instead of connection. It started on a night that meant nothing. Antonio was in the back seat of his car, staring out at the blurred city lights. He wasn't thinking about anything important. Just numbers. Deals. Problems that needed solving. His phone slipped slightly in his hand. One accidental tap. A wrong number. A mistake. The call connected. And a voice answered. Naomi picked up on the second ring. Her shift was almost over. Her feet hurt. Her mind was halfway home already. Still, she answered with the same calm professionalism she always used. The Blue Hour. This is Naomi. What can I get started for you? There was a pause. Not awkward. Not rushed. Just silence. Antonio didn't speak immediately. Because something about her voice stopped him. It wasn't loud. It wasn't seductive. It was steady. Human. The kind of voice that had learned how to survive bad days and still choose kindness anyway. I think I called the wrong number, he finally said. A soft laugh came through the phone. Not flirty. Not forced. Just real. Then you probably needed to, Naomi replied. That sentence landed in him like something unfamiliar. Like truth. Like something he hadn't heard in years. Antonio didn't know why he stayed on the line. But he did. For 30 seconds. Then a minute. Then longer than he intended. And when the call ended, he didn't delete the number. Naomi didn't think about the call again that night. Not deeply. It was just another strange moment in a long shift. But something small lingered. The man on the other end of the line hadn't sounded like her usual customers. He sounded distant. Like someone standing too far away from their own life. And strangely, she understood that feeling. 2 nights later, the phone rang again. Same time. Same number. Naomi hesitated. Then answered. The Blue Hour. Silence again. Then his voice. I was hoping I dialed wrong again. She paused. Then smiled without meaning to. Well, she said softly, you're consistent, I'll give you that. That was the beginning. Neither of them named it. Neither of them understood it. But something invisible had started forming between 2 strangers. A connection built not on sight. But on voice. On presence. On loneliness recognizing loneliness. Antonio had everything money could buy. Power. Influence. Fear from others. But he didn't have peace. Naomi had none of those things. But she had something he didn't recognize at first. Warmth. Routine. A life that, despite its struggle, still had human connection in it. And somehow, that became the thing he started returning for. Not food. Not information. Just her voice. Over the next few nights, the calls continued. Always late. Always accidental. Always wrong numbers that became less and less believable. Naomi never pushed him. Antonio never explained himself. But something unspoken began to form in the space between them. Something fragile. Something dangerous. Something neither of them was ready for. Because both of them were still carrying wounds that hadn't healed. And hearts that had learned to fear hope more than pain. And yet, they kept talking. Do you believe it's truly possible to fall in love with someone, just through their voice alone? Share your thoughts below. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. For Naomi Carter, it always was. The Blue Hour diner was half full, late-night truckers, a tired nurse scrolling through her phone, a couple arguing quietly in a corner booth like they had done this argument many times before. The neon sign outside flickered again. Same rhythm. Same life. Same routine. But something about that night felt slightly off. Like the air was waiting for something it couldn't name yet. Behind the counter, Naomi wiped down the coffee machine, her movements automatic. She was tired in the way only women who carry too much for too long understand, deep, quiet exhaustion that sleep never fully fixes. Then the phone rang. She reached for it without looking. The Blue Hour. This is Naomi. Silence. But this time, it felt heavier. Then a voice came through. I didn't expect you to pick up this fast. Naomi paused. That voice again. The same one from the wrong number calls. Low. Controlled. Somewhere between tired and distant. You're getting better at calling at the right time, she said lightly. A faint pause. Then. I'm not sure I ever call at the right time, he replied. Something about the way he said it made her stop smiling for a second. Not sadness exactly. Something older. For the first time, Naomi didn't rush the call. She leaned against the counter. Let the noise of the diner fade into the background. So, she said, are you ordering tonight or just collecting wrong numbers as a hobby? A soft exhale came through the line. Almost like a laugh that hadn't been used in a long time. I don't usually talk this much, he admitted. Most people don't, Naomi replied. They just talk at people. That made him quiet again. A longer silence. Then. You don't sound like someone who works in a diner, he said. Naomi raised a brow slightly. And what does someone who works in a diner sound like? Exhausted, he said honestly. She looked down at her hands. He wasn't wrong. But something about the way he said it didn't feel judgmental. It felt observed. Seen. Not analyzed. Seen. Across the city, Antonio DeLuca sat in the back of his car, staring out at glass buildings glowing like silent witnesses. His driver said nothing. Nobody ever did. But Antonio wasn't thinking about meetings tonight. He wasn't thinking about power. He was thinking about a voice on a phone. A voice that didn't ask who he was. Didn't try to impress him. Didn't fear him. Just spoke to him like he was, human. And that was dangerous. Because men like him were not supposed to crave that. Over the next few nights, the calls became predictable. Same hour. Same number. Same man. Naomi stopped pretending it was accidental. But she never questioned him directly. Instead, she adapted. She began saving the last 10 minutes of her shift for him. Not because she needed to. But because she wanted to. One night, as she stacked cups, she asked quietly. "Do you ever sleep properly?" A pause. Then his voice came softer than usual. "Not really." Naomi nodded to herself. "Yeah," she said. "Me neither." And for a moment, two strangers shared something more honest than most people share in years of knowing each other. One night, the diner got unusually quiet. A storm outside pushed most customers away early. Naomi was alone behind the counter. The phone rang. She answered. But this time, his voice sounded different. Heavier. Tired in a way she hadn't heard before. "You ever feel like your life is just something you're managing instead of living?" he asked. Naomi stopped wiping the counter. That question hit too close. She looked out the window. Rain streaking down glass. "I think," she said slowly, "most people stop living without realizing it. They just keep functioning." A long silence. Then he said something unexpected. "I don't want that anymore." Naomi frowned slightly. "That's a dangerous thing to admit," she replied. "Why?" "Because wanting more usually means risking what you already survived." That line stayed between them. Hanging. Heavy. Real. Over time, something changed. They started talking about small things. Not identities. Not lives. Just moments. Naomi told him about customers who tipped poorly but apologized too sincerely. He told her about nights where silence in expensive rooms felt louder than gunfire. Neither of them explained that last part fully. But neither needed to. Because somehow, they understood more than they should. That night changed everything. Antonio didn't plan to go to the diner. He had no reason to. But something felt wrong in his world. Deals unfinished. Men arguing in rooms he didn't enter. A wait he couldn't name. So he did something he rarely did. He left control behind. And he drove. Not to a meeting. Not to power. But toward a voice. The Blue Hour diner was dim under the storm. Neon light flickering against wet pavement. Antonio stepped inside. He didn't announce himself. He didn't belong in spaces like this, and it showed in the way he paused at the entrance for half a second longer than necessary. Naomi looked up from the counter. Saw him. And didn't recognize him. Not truly. Just another man. Tall. Quiet. Expensive coat slightly damp from rain. Tired eyes. Like he had been carrying something too heavy for too long. "Phone still works better than cars around here," she said lightly as she placed a coffee in front of him. Antonio sat down slowly. Watched her. Not in the way men usually did. But in a quieter way. Like he was trying to understand something unfamiliar. "You always talk like that to strangers?" he asked. Naomi shrugged. "Only the ones who look like they need it." That made him pause. Because she had no idea how accurate she was. He should have introduced himself. He didn't. She should have asked questions. She didn't. Instead, they sat in silence for a few seconds. Not awkward. Not empty. Just present. Antonio looked around the diner. The cracked booths. The tired walls. The flickering clock. And then back at her. "This place feels forgotten," he said quietly. Naomi followed his gaze. "It's not forgotten," she replied. "It's just not pretending to be anything else." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. Because it reminded him of something he had lost a long time ago. Honesty. As the storm outside intensified, fewer people came in. The diner grew quieter. Naomi leaned on the counter. "You're not from around here," she said. Antonio gave a faint smile. "No. Business trip?" A pause. Then. "Something like that." She nodded, not pushing. Then said something she didn't usually say to customers. "You look like someone who forgets to breathe properly." That caught him off guard. He almost laughed. "Almost. I didn't know that was visible," he said. "It is," she replied simply. And for the first time in years. Antonio DeLuca felt like someone had looked at him and seen past everything he used to hide behind. Have you ever met someone who felt like a stranger, but somehow understood you better than people who've known you for years? That night, Antonio didn't stay long. But when he left, he didn't feel like he was leaving a diner. He felt like he was leaving a piece of himself behind. And Naomi? She didn't know his name. Didn't know his world. Didn't know that the man who drank her coffee quietly could change everything she thought she knew about life. But she remembered his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she found herself waiting for the phone to ring again. After that night at the Blue Hour, nothing officially changed. But everything felt different. Naomi Carter tried to convince herself it was nothing. Just another customer. Just another quiet man with tired eyes. But the phone told a different story. Because he called again. And again. And again. Always late. Always after the world had gone quiet. And always with that same voice that seemed to carry too much silence behind it. One night, Naomi was folding receipts when the phone rang. She didn't even hesitate anymore. The Blue Hour. A pause. Then his voice. "You sound like you've been standing all day." Naomi glanced down at her aching feet. "Congratulations," she said lightly. "You've discovered the concept of working." A faint exhale, almost a laugh. "I didn't mean it like that," he said. "I know," she replied. That was the strange part. She did know. He never spoke to diminish her. He spoke like someone who understood exhaustion, even if from a different world. A different kind of exhaustion. The kind money couldn't fix. Antonio DeLuca didn't notice it at first. But his nights were becoming different. He stopped answering calls immediately. Stopped rushing meetings. Stopped letting silence feel comfortable again. Because silence now reminded him of her voice. And that was the problem. A man like Antonio was not supposed to look forward to anything. But he did. He looked forward to her laughter. Small. Unplanned. Real. The kind of laughter that didn't exist in his world of deals and loyalty tests. Naomi noticed something worse. She started waiting. Not consciously at first. But emotionally. She'd linger near the phone during slow hours. Check the time more often. Wonder if tonight would be the night he called. And when he did, something inside her softened in ways she didn't know how to explain. But she didn't tell anyone. Not her daughter. Not her coworkers. Not even herself. Because women like Naomi learn early. Hope can become expensive. One night, rain hammered the diner windows. The city felt distant. Empty. Naomi was alone at the counter when he called. But this time, his voice was different. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, it came slower. Heavier. Do you ever feel like no matter how much you've achieved, you still don't belong anywhere? He asked. Naomi stopped wiping the counter. That question wasn't casual. That was personal. She leaned against the counter. I think, she said carefully, some people spend their whole lives building places, just to realize they were never building a home. Silence. Then his voice softened. That's exactly it. And something shifted between them. Not attraction. Not romance. Something deeper. Recognition. After that night, their conversations changed. They stopped pretending it was random. They stopped avoiding deeper topics. Naomi started telling him small truths about her life. Not dramatic ones. Real ones. How she sometimes eats standing up because sitting alone feels heavier. How she used to love dancing before life made her forget what music felt like. Antonio listened. Always listened. Like her voice was something worth preserving. And in return, he began sharing fragments of himself. Not his name. Not his world. Just pieces. I don't trust people easily, he admitted one night. Naomi replied softly, neither do I. A pause. Then she added. But I think trust isn't something you find. It's something that grows when you stop running from it. Antonio didn't respond right away. Because no one had ever explained trust to him like that. But worlds like Antonio's never stay quiet for long. One night, his driver mentioned something casually. Boss, there's been movement around one of your old properties. Antonio barely responded. His attention was elsewhere. Somewhere far more dangerous. Not in buildings. Not in deals. But in a diner phone line. Still, his world didn't care about what he wanted. It followed him. Always. At the same time, Naomi's reality tightened. Her diner manager mentioned rising rent. Hours might be cut. The owner was considering selling. Naomi stood in the break room, staring at a notice she hadn't asked to see. Her stomach sank quietly. Because survival always came first. Not feelings. Not voices on phones. Just survival. That night, she almost didn't answer the call. But she did. Because she already knew something dangerous had started. When she picked up, she didn't speak immediately. Neither did he. Just breathing. Two lives on opposite sides of something fragile. Then Antonio said quietly, "Are you okay?" That question should have been simple. But it wasn't. Because no one usually asked her that and meant it. Naomi hesitated. Then answered honestly. "I'm managing." A pause. Then she added softly. "That's what people like me do." Silence stretched between them. Then Antonio said something unexpected. "You shouldn't have to just manage your life." Naomi closed her eyes for a second. Because that sentence felt too kind for her reality. After that, something subtle changed. They started talking longer. Staying on the line even after there was nothing left to say. Sometimes just sharing silence. Sometimes breathing through exhaustion. Sometimes laughing quietly at nothing at all. And slowly. Without permission. Without planning. They began to matter to each other. One night, Naomi's coworker joked. "You got someone on the phone again?" Naomi froze slightly. "Just a customer," she said too quickly. But her coworker smirked. "Girl, customers don't make you smile like that." Naomi didn't respond. Because she didn't know how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. Antonio sat alone in his office one night after a long call. The city stretched beneath him like a silent warning. He should have been thinking about business. Control. Power. But instead, he was thinking about her voice. And the way she said simple things like they mattered. And that scared him more than anything else in his life. Because men like him survive by controlling everything. But Naomi was becoming something he couldn't control. Neither of them said it out loud. But both felt it. This was no longer just conversation. It was attachment. And attachment always leads to risk. Because eventually, truth demands to be seen. Would you risk opening your heart again, if you knew it could completely change your life in ways you can't undo? That night, after their call ended, Naomi stayed at the counter longer than usual. Staring at the quiet diner. Wondering why a stranger's voice felt like something she had been missing her entire life. And across the city, Antonio DeLuca sat in silence. Realizing something terrifying. He wasn't just calling her anymore. He was beginning to need her. It started like any other night. Rain on the city streets. Neon lights bleeding into wet asphalt. Naomi Carter behind the counter at the Blue Hour, folding napkins that didn't need folding just to keep her hands busy. And Antonio DeLuca, somewhere across the city, sitting in a room filled with silence that never felt empty enough. Then the phone rang. Naomi smiled faintly without realizing it. She reached for it. The Blue Hour. This is Naomi. But this time, there was no warmth on the other end. Just silence. Longer than usual. heavier than usual. Then a voice came through, but not Antonio's calm, controlled tone. A different voice. "Is this the diner worker?" Naomi frowned slightly. "Yes, who is this?" Pause. Then. "You should know who you've been talking to." A chill ran through her chest. And then it happened. A television mounted in the diner flickered to life behind her. Breaking news. A corporate segment. A man stepping out of a black car surrounded by security. The caption on the screen read, "Antonio DeLuca, logistics tycoon and industrial power player." Naomi froze. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. Because the face on the screen was the same man who had been calling her every night. The same voice that had learned her laughter. The same silence that had started to feel like comfort. But the truth was heavier than comfort. Because Antonio DeLuca wasn't just a businessman. He was connected to a world she had spent her entire life avoiding without even knowing it existed. At the exact same moment, Antonio received a report. A file opened on his desk. One of his associates spoke carefully. "There's something you need to see." Antonio barely looked up. But when he did, his entire expression changed. A document. A property acquisition. A diner. The Blue Hour. His diner. Or rather, a deal signed under his network years ago. Without his awareness. A quiet transaction buried under layers of legitimate business. A place he had unknowingly marked for takeover. The same place she worked. The same place she lived. The same place where her voice had become the only thing keeping him human. Antonio stood still. For the first time in years. He didn't know what to do. Naomi didn't answer the phone again that night. Not when it rang. Not when it rang again. Not even when it rang a third time. She just stood there behind the counter. Staring at the television. At his face. At the realization that everything she thought was simple was not. Customers noticed her silence. "Naomi? You okay?" She nodded automatically. But her hands were shaking. Because betrayal doesn't always come from lies. Sometimes it comes from truth arriving too late. Antonio called again. And again. And again. No answer. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. Not because of enemies. Not because of violence. But because of a woman who refused to pick up the phone. And that was worse. Far worse. Because he couldn't control it. He couldn't fix it with money. He couldn't command it into obedience. All he could do was wait. Later that night, Naomi sat alone in her apartment. The TV still glowing. The city still alive outside her window. But inside her, everything had gone quiet. She replayed every call. Every laugh. Every silence. And now they all felt different. Not fake. Not necessarily. But incomplete. Because she had been speaking to a man whose life was built on things she could never step into safely. A world of power. Control. Secrets. And violence that didn't make noise until it was too late. And suddenly, she understood why he always sounded like he was far away from himself. Because he was. Antonio stood alone in his office for a long time. The city beneath him didn't feel like his anymore. Nothing did. Because for the first time, he wasn't thinking like a boss. He was thinking like a man who had finally been seen. And possibly lost that chance. He whispered into the empty room. I didn't mean to bring my world to her. But the truth was worse. His world had always been there. She just hadn't known. Days passed. No calls. No late-night voices. No quiet laughter. Just silence. And silence is loud when it replaces something that mattered. Naomi went through her shifts mechanically. Smiling when needed. Speaking when required. But something in her had shifted permanently. She no longer waited for the phone. Even though part of her still did. And Antonio? He stopped sleeping. Stopped focusing. Stopped pretending control mattered. Because for the first time, he had something he couldn't command. One night, the rain returned harder than before. Naomi was closing the diner early. Her manager had already left. The neon sign flickered outside like it was struggling to stay alive. Then, the door opened. Slowly. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Controlled. Antonio DeLuca stepped inside. Soaking slightly from the rain. No security. No car waiting. Just him. Naomi looked up. And froze. For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. The world outside disappeared. Only the space between them remained. Finally, Naomi spoke. You should have told me. Antonio nodded once. I know. Her voice tightened slightly. Do you have any idea what I thought you were? He didn't answer immediately. Then. No, he said honestly. But I know what I am. That hit differently. Because it wasn't denial. It was acceptance. Naomi stepped back slightly. I don't live in your world, she said quietly. Antonio took a step forward, but stopped. I never asked you to, he replied. A pause. Then softer. I only asked for your voice. That made her look at him fully. For the first time in days. She saw not power. Not danger. But exhaustion. A man who looked like he hadn't slept since the moment she stopped answering. I didn't know about the diner, Antonio said. His voice steady. But honest. That deal wasn't me. But it was my name. My world. My mess. He swallowed slightly. And I understand if that changes everything. Naomi stared at him. For a long time. The anger was still there. But underneath it was something more complicated. Because he wasn't hiding. He wasn't excusing. He was standing in it. Fully. Naomi finally spoke. I trusted a voice I didn't know. Antonio nodded. And I trusted a voice I couldn't stop thinking about. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything they hadn't said before. Do you think love can survive when the truth finally destroys the illusion it was built on? Naomi didn't forgive him that night. But she didn't walk away either. And Antonio didn't leave. He simply stood there. Waiting. Not as a boss. Not as a man of power. But as someone who finally understood that some connections are not built to be controlled. Only faced. The rain had finally stopped. But the air still felt heavy. Naomi Carter stood behind the counter of the Blue Hour, staring at the same empty booth Antonio DeLuca had sat in the night before. Nothing looked different. But everything felt different. People still came in. Coffee was still served. Orders were still taken. Life, on the surface, refused to stop. But inside Naomi, something had shifted permanently. Because once you see the truth behind someone's world, you don't get to unsee it. Antonio came back 3 days later. No warning. No entourage. No performance of power. Just him. Standing at the entrance of the diner like someone who wasn't sure he deserved to walk in. Naomi looked up slowly. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them was no longer comfortable. But it was honest. Finally, Antonio said, "I didn't come to convince you of anything." A pause. "I came because I couldn't stay away." Naomi's expression didn't change. But her hands tightened slightly around the counter. "You said your world didn't touch me," Naomi said quietly. Antonio nodded. "It shouldn't have." A beat. Then she added, "But it did." That landed heavily. Because it was the truth neither of them could escape. Not anger anymore. Not confusion. Just reality. He stepped forward slightly, but carefully. Like approaching something fragile. "I've spent my whole life controlling things," he said. "My business. My enemies. My name." He exhaled slowly. "But I couldn't control you." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "And that scared you?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. "It changed me." That made her pause. Because there was no manipulation in his voice. No excuse. Just exhaustion. And honesty. Naomi turned away slightly. Looked at the empty diner. At the life she had built with her own hands. "I don't trust easily," she said. "I know," Antonio replied. Another pause. Then she whispered, "I don't want to be another casualty in someone else's world." That line hit deeper than either of them expected. Antonio didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Just listened. After a long silence, Naomi finally turned back. Her voice softer now. "But I also know what it feels like." She hesitated. To be alone and still somehow wait for a voice that understands you. Antonio's eyes didn't leave hers. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He just waited. Naomi stepped closer to the counter. Not fully closing the distance. But not running away either. "I don't trust your world," she said again. Antonio nodded. "I don't want you to." A pause. Then she added, But I think I trust you, even if I don't understand everything about you. That silence after her words felt different. Not tense. Not fearful. Something closer to fragile hope. I can't undo what I am, Antonio said quietly. I can't change the world I come from. He looked at her directly. But I can choose what I bring into yours. Naomi studied him carefully. Searching for the lie that wasn't there. Finding none. For the first time. Naomi exhaled fully. Not in surrender. But in release. I'm tired of surviving everything alone, she admitted quietly. Antonio nodded once. I am too. That was the moment neither of them planned for. Not romance. Not fantasy. Just two exhausted people recognizing the same truth. Loneliness was no longer necessary. Weeks passed. Then months. Antonio didn't disappear. But he also didn't dominate her world. He learned her pace. Her boundaries. Her life. Naomi didn't step into his world. But she allowed him into hers, carefully. Slowly. On her terms. Sometimes he came to the diner just to sit quietly. Sometimes they talked until closing. Sometimes they said nothing at all. And somehow, that was enough. Naomi still works at the Blue Hour. But the place feels different now. Less like survival. More like presence. Antonio still lives in his world of power and silence. But he no longer lives only there. Because now, he has somewhere to return to. Not an empire. Not a title. But a voice that once answered a wrong number. And became the first right thing in his life in years. Love didn't fix them. It didn't erase their past. It didn't make their world smaller or simpler. But it gave them something they hadn't had in a long time. A reason to stop running. And a reason to stay. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive to complete a life. It arrives to remind you that you're still allowed to build one. Stories like this remind us that love doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes, it begins there. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful emotional love stories. And tell me, if love found you again after everything you've been through, would you have the courage to answer it? Thank you for watching. And don't miss the next story waiting for you.